Outside the temple, the afternoon sun filtered through the leafy canopy, creating dappled patterns of light and shadow on the tree-lined path. It was a tranquil setting, yet the atmosphere between the royal couple walking along it was anything but harmonious. Rosweiss walked deliberately on the left side of the path, while Leon stuck to the right. The gap between them was so wide it could easily fit a half-grown dragon. A dragon maid appeared ahead, sweeping the pathway with a broom. She glanced first to the left and then to the right, bowing slightly. "Good afternoon, Your Majesty, the Queen," she greeted Rosweiss, then turned to Leon. "Good afternoon, Prince." Her tone was respectful, but inwardly, the dragon maid was exasperated. What is wrong with these two? She thought. Finally appearing together in public, but still keeping such a ridiculous distance. Even bowing is inconvenient like this. It wasn't just the dragon maid who was confused. A few dragons hiding in the nearby bushes to watch the royal couple's stroll had their own commentary. What's going on? They don't seem very close. Don't be ridiculous. They've got two little princesses. They must be close. Then why are they walking so far apart? Have you ever seen a married couple stroll like this? Maybe they just value their personal space? Huh. Do you even believe that nonsense yourself? Shoo, they're coming. The group quickly ducked further into the bushes, holding their breath as Leon and Rosweiss passed. Leon, despite his weakened physical state following his heroic battle 3 days prior, still had sharp senses. He noticed the rustling and overheard snippets of the whispered gossip. Touching his nose, he glanced at Rosweiss, wondering if she'd picked up on it too. As a powerful mother dragon, she surely had. Yet, she said nothing. She wasn't going to suggest they close the gap between them, and Leon had no intention of bringing it up himself. Maintaining the facade of a peaceful family seemed to be Rosweiss' priority, and Leon wasn't too concerned with how others perceived their relationship. Until... "Hey," Rosweiss' voice broke the silence. Leon turned his head slightly. "Let's get a bit closer," she said, her tone calm but firm. Leon raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Sure, okay." They both shifted closer to the center of the path, until there was about a meter's distance between them. "Is this good?" Leon asked, testing the waters. "Yeah. Do you want to get even closer?" Rosweiss replied, her gaze still fixed ahead. Her unexpected suggestion made Leon hesitate. His steps faltered as he looked at her cautiously. "Mother Dragon, are you planning something?" Rosweiss turned her head slightly, her silver eyes meeting his. There was no coldness in them this time, just a surprising gentleness. "No. I mean it. If you want, I won't refuse, and I won't tease you either. This walk was part of the promise we made when I taught Mune to write her name, after all." Leon studied her carefully, sensing something different about her today. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but it made him uneasy. "Actually, forget it. This is fine," he said quickly. Rosweiss nodded, showing no outward reaction. "Okay." Just then, a familiar voice interrupted their tentative progress. "Dad. Mother." They looked ahead to see their youngest daughter, Mune, standing in the middle of the path with her hands on her hips. The tuft of hair on her head swayed slightly in the breeze, and her little tail wagged with excitement. "Mune? Weren't you playing with your sister in the room?" Rosweiss asked, arching a brow. Sister Noah asked Mune to track you," the little dragon girl announced. Rosweiss sighed. "Noah would never ask you to do that. You just wanted to follow us, didn't you?" Caught red-handed, Mune abandoned her pretense and darted between them, grabbing both of their hands. "Mune wants to take a walk with Dad and Mother," she declared, her wide eyes sparkling with determination. Leon smiled, glad for the distraction. Sure, he said, but Rosweiss was less enthusiastic. "No, Mune," she said firmly. "Dad and I are walking alone. Be good and don't cause trouble." Mune pouted, clearly displeased. She glanced at Leon, her big eyes full of dramatic sadness. Mune beamed triumphantly, but Rosweiss shook her head. "Leon, you're too soft on her." But Mune left after placing their parents' hands together. Further back, hidden behind a tree, Mune's elder sister Noah watched the scene with a wry smile. "You did that on purpose, didn't you, Mune?" she said, stepping out from the shadows. "Ah. Sister, you scared me." Mune yelped, clutching her chest. "What's so interesting about watching them hold hands?" Noah asked, crossing her arms. "It is interesting," Mune insisted. Noah smirked and pinched her sister's chubby cheeks. "You little troublemaker. You just wanted to stir things up." Ow. Mune was wrong. "Let go, sister." As the two played and bickered, Mune cast a lingering glance at their parents. Seeing her dad and mom holding hands, she smiled to herself. "TSK, Dad doesn't even know how to take the initiative," she muttered under her breath. "Good thing Mune is here to help." Sleeping with the dragon mother, bearing offspring with the dragon mother, taking a leisurely walk with the dragon mother, and once again, holding hands with the dragon mother. In an era of advanced information, if Leon's actions were exposed, regardless of his intentions, he would face public scrutiny. After Myun left, they didn't release each other's hands. However, as the awkwardness peaked, it became less noticeable. In such a situation, how much more awkward could it get? Once their hands were held, onlookers were busy shipping and secretly cheering. Leon, blushing, cleared his throat, still holding her hand, his face turning away. If you don't want to hold hands, you can let go, he suggested. Rosweiss, blushing, insisted, it's okay, let's keep holding hands to avoid gossip. Sure, Leon said, glancing at Rosweiss. Recalling her earlier suggestion to get closer, Leon couldn't help but ask, you seem unusually gentle today. For a dragoness, Leon would use gentle only in his daydreams. When saying it aloud, gentle might be more appropriate. Is that so? Rosweiss inquired. Yes, Leon confirmed. Rosweiss' pupils flickered, calculating something, but she quickly resumed her serious demeanor. It seems I have tamed you, Dragon Slayer. Now that we get along well, you're the one who seems uncomfortable. Leon adopted a playful tone, bantering, talking about being comfortable or not, it seems the tiger has fallen into the plains and is bullied by the dog. Rosweiss raised an eyebrow, playfully tightening her grip. Wrong, it's the tiger that has fallen into the plains and been taken by the dragon. She deliberately prolonged the tone, leaving it as a cliffhanger. Leon turned his head, intrigued. Taken by the dragon? Taken by the dragon rider? Damn. Leon rolled his eyes but realized they were still holding hands. The fingers were interlocked, making it difficult to shake them off. This unintentional shake made them truly feel the sensation of holding hands. With palms facing each other, heat couldn't escape, and soon a thin layer of sweat appeared. Their steps stirred their hands, allowing them to rub each other's palms. It felt tingling and ticklish, causing an itching sensation in their hearts. There are chairs ahead. Let's sit for a while, Rosweiss suggested. Okay. As they both sat down, they instinctively withdrew their hands. At that moment, they both breathed a sigh of relief. But they felt the emptiness in their palms and the coolness that followed. Leon didn't take the initiative to hold Rosweiss' hand again. Leaning against the chair, he enjoyed the warm sunlight, finding comfort in its rays. It could temporarily help him forget the loneliness of being away from home. She glanced at Leon, whose eyes were closed and savoring the moment, thought for a moment, and asked, "Do you miss home?" "Yeah," he replied. However, though his attitude seemed somewhat perfunctory, his inner feelings were genuine. He truly missed home. Rosweiss' pupils trembled slightly as she asked, "Your parents?" "I grew up in an orphanage and never met my parents. My master and mistress adopted me." "Oh, then we're similar. Are you an orphan?" It was a bit tense, like scolding someone. But Leon, being straightforward and candid, didn't think too much about it. Fortunately, Rosweiss didn't really understand the human social logic of cursing. She just shook her head and earnestly responded, "No, what I mean is, I haven't met my father and mother either. Our grandmother raised my sister and me." As she said this, she slightly lowered her head, finally willing to change her dignified and elegant sitting posture. Leon opened his eyes just a sliver, secretly sizing her up. The proud queen, at this moment, appeared a bit lonely. Leon closed his eyes again, with no intention of empathizing with her, just teasing as usual. "Oh, that explains it." Rosweiss looked at him. "Explains what?" "That explains why you're not good at being a mom." "I'm not good at being a mom, being a mother?" "You see, when Myun and the others aren't around, you always use the word mother." Rosweiss frowned. "Is there something wrong with the term mother?" "Then, how do they address you?" "They call me dad." Leon shrugged. "See, according to the usual way of addressing, dad is always paired with mom. Myun prefers to call me dad instead of father, indicating that she prefers this more affectionate term. Isn't the term mother endearing?" Rosweiss asked seriously. "Of course, it's not that it's not endearing. It's just too formal. It makes things a bit awkward." Upon hearing this, Rosweiss contemplated for a moment and nodded. "Okay, no need. If I lose, you can do whatever you want," she added, "except for letting you go home." Leon chuckled but didn't say anything. After the topic was addressed, they remained silent for about 20 minutes. Rosweiss slowly stood up and said, "Let's go. We have another place to go." "What place?" "Well, actually, inviting you out this time wasn't just for a walk. I also want to show you something." Rosweiss said, "I can't let you go home, but this should help alleviate your troubles." Leon didn't inquire about what it was but squinted at Rosweiss. "You're really acting a bit strange today, Mother Dragon." Rosweiss shrugged. "Since you don't believe me, forget it. Let's just go back now." With that, Rosweiss turned around and walked back the way they came. But she heard Leon calling from behind before she could take a couple of steps. "Hey, take me to see what it is." Rosweiss, with her back to Leon, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "Finally, I'm hooked." Rosweiss led Leon along a winding path that meandered through the back mountain of the temple, their footsteps echoing softly against the smooth stone steps. The trail gradually descended deeper into the woods. "Where are you taking me?" Leon asked, trailing slightly behind her. "You'll see soon enough," Rosweiss replied, her tone casual yet cryptic. Leon hesitated for a moment, his eyes scanning their secluded surroundings. The dense forest, the quiet atmosphere, and the fact that they were alone triggered unpleasant memories. He stopped abruptly, swallowing nervously. "Listen, Mother Dragon," he began, his voice filled with suspicion. "If you're planning to pull off another one of those stunts like last time, trying to tie me to your temple or trick me into doing something weird, it's not going to work. I've got zero attachment to your territory, just so you know." Rosweiss chuckled softly but didn't turn to face him. "Relax. I'm not that unreasonable, or cruel," she said, her tone light. "When it's time to relax, we relax. When it's time to reminisce," she trailed off as they rounded a bend in the path. Before them stood a towering iron gate embedded in a stone structure, its surface cold and imposing. "We think about home," she finished. Leon's gaze shifted between Rosweiss and the gate. It was unguarded, with no sign or markings to indicate its purpose, just a stark and unyielding barrier. "What is this place?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. "Oh, it doesn't really have a name," Rosweiss said with a shrug. "Call it a warehouse, a storage room, or even the Queen's treasury if you like. It's up to you." Without waiting for his response, she raised her hand, and silver magical energy swirled at her fingertips. The ethereal light danced briefly before surging into the keyhole, causing the iron gate to groan as it slowly swung inward. Rosweiss stepped through first, motioning for him to follow. "Come on." Leon hesitated briefly before silently walking in after her. As he descended a short flight of steps, rows of meticulously organized shelves stretched out before him, each adorned with rare and exotic treasures. His eyes widened as he took in the sight, and he darted to the nearest display shelf. There, resting upon a velvet cushion, was an intricately crafted bracelet. Its artistry and rarity were undeniable. Leon, despite his cynical nature, couldn't suppress his awe. If this were in the Empire, it would sell for at least a few 100,000 gold coins. "That was a gift from my grandmother for my coming-of-age ceremony," Rosweiss said from behind him. Leon nodded, barely hearing her as he moved from shelf to shelf, marveling at the artifacts. His excitement overtook him entirely, leaving him unaware of the soft click of the iron door being locked behind him. After some time, his fascination began to wane. He turned to Rosweiss, his curiosity now mixed with suspicion. "Why did you bring me here?" Rosweiss smiled mysteriously and reached up to a high shelf, retrieving a small box covered in a thin layer of dust. She set it down carefully on the ground, brushing the dust away with a gentle breath. "I told you," she said as she opened the box, "there are things here that might help ease your troubles." Leon leaned in to look. His eyes widened, his breath catching in his throat. Inside the box lay a familiar sight, his black gold war machine. This suit of armor, crafted by the Empire's most skilled artisans, had been his steadfast companion through countless battles. It had shielded him from fatal blows, a loyal protector against countless enemies. Slowly, Leon reached out and ran his fingertips over the armor's surface. The texture, the faint hum of enchanted energy, it was just as he remembered. There wasn't even a hint of decay or neglect. "You've kept it, perfectly preserved," he murmured, a touch of gratitude in his voice. Rosweiss gestured toward the armor with a slight smile. "Why don't you try it on?" Leon blinked, momentarily startled. "Ha, go on," she insisted. "Try it on." Without further prompting, Leon carefully lifted the pieces of the black gold war machine from the box, fitting them onto his body with practiced ease. Each piece felt like a second skin, as familiar and comforting as an old friend. Once fully suited, he stood tall, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. Rosweiss folded her arms, nodding approvingly. "You look just as dashing as you did when you swung your sword at me back then." Leon rolled his eyes. Only dragons could find a backhanded compliment like that flattering. Still, he couldn't suppress the grin on his face as he admired himself. The black gold war machine gleamed as though it had just been forged. Yet, as he ran his hand over the chest plate, his fingers paused on a small, barely noticeable notch. "How'd this happen?" he asked, frowning. "The armor's enchanted. It should have repaired itself by now." Rosweiss tilted her head, feigning ignorance. "Oh, I don't know. Maybe it got scratched or bumped." Leon frowned, unconvinced, but let it go. He wiped at the notch absent-mindedly, the joy of reuniting with his old companion overwhelming any lingering doubts. "Thanks," he said finally. "I didn't expect this from you, Rosweiss. I really appreciate it." Rosweiss raised an eyebrow. "Thanks. Yeah. Leon's words faltered as he lifted his gaze. His smile froze. The dragoness before him had completely transformed. Her gentle, dignified demeanor was gone, replaced by a predatory glint in her silver eyes. Pink heart-shaped lights flickered in her pupils, and faint dragon patterns shimmered beneath the fabric of her clothing. She wore a sly grin that made Leon instinctively take a step back. "Mother Dragon, let me remind you," Leon said cautiously, straightening his posture. "This armor enhances my abilities. I'm not afraid of you." Rosweiss smirked. "Do you really think I maintained your armor for 2 years without adding a little, something extra?" Leon's heart sank. "Wait, what?" Rosweiss raised her hand and snapped her fingers. Instantly, the armor grew unbearably heavy, dragging Leon to the ground with a resounding clang. The dragon patterns on the chest plate began to glow ominously. "What the hell did you do?" Leon shouted, struggling against the weight. Rosweiss knelt beside him, her movements graceful and deliberate. She flipped him onto his back effortlessly, pinning him in place. "You didn't think I forgot what happened 3 days ago, did you?" she purred. Her voice dripped with satisfaction. "I've been on my best behavior all day. And you," she leaned closer, her grin widening, "you fell for it." Leon glared at her, panic creeping into his voice. The hand-holding, the treasure, the talk about family, was any of it real? "Oh, it was real," Rosweiss admitted, her tone turning saccharine. "But that doesn't change what I'm about to do now." She loosened her collar, revealing more of the glowing dragon patterns etched across her skin. "You said I liked conquest, didn't you?" she whispered, her lips curling into a mischievous smile. "Well, Leon, let's see how much you really like being conquered." Leon's pupils trembled as she leaned in, her voice turning playful yet commanding. "Are you ready, my dear husband?" The sensation brought by the double dragon patterns was a heightened torment. With just a gentle glide of her fingertips over Leon's skin, Rosweiss could ignite a fiery explosion of sensation, overwhelming and consuming. Leon bit his lip, his brow furrowed as he clenched his fists tightly. He exerted every ounce of willpower to suppress the primal instincts roaring within him. Yet, the electric surge of the dragon patterns coursed through him, eroding his resolve like a relentless flood. Rosweiss hardly needed any effort to escalate the tension. Her mere presence, the curve of her lips as she looked down at him with an enchanting smile, was enough to spark the flames burning within Leon. "Double dragon patterns, what does it feel like, Leon? Care to share?" Her voice was teasing, her smile a blend of charm and cruelty, like an ethereal temptress. For a dragon, moments of excitement boiled down to 2 primal urges: destruction and conquest. Rosweiss was no exception. She, too, was battling the overwhelming pull of her dragon instincts. She longed to claim Leon, to shatter his will and pride, to force him into submission. But Rosweiss had no intention of rushing. She wanted to savor this moment, to draw out his torment, and to relish every ounce of resistance he could muster. Leon's defiance, his struggle to maintain composure, to cling to his pride as a dragon slayer despite the overwhelming resonance of the dragon patterns, was a victory in itself for Rosweiss. It was her ultimate revenge. She reached out, brushing the back of her hand against his fevered cheek. Her gaze lingered on his face, taking in the lines of exhaustion and maturity that had replaced the scars of his youth. "You still look handsome, Leon," she murmured. Perhaps even more so than 2 years ago. Even this simple touch was enough to set Leon's heart ablaze. He gritted his teeth, his restraint fraying under the unbearable force of the double dragon patterns. It didn't help that Rosweiss had tampered with his armor, adding another layer of torment to his plight. "Damn it," he growled, his voice low and guttural as the resonance surged. His vision blurred, his breath grew ragged, and he could feel his sanity slipping. Rosweiss' eyes gleamed with mischief, her smile widening as she leaned closer to him. Silver strands of her hair cascaded forward, brushing lightly against his forehead and nose, sending tiny shocks of sensation through him. "Leon," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Rosweiss," he croaked, his voice strained. She gave a soft, almost mocking laugh. "This is just revenge," she whispered, her breath brushing against his lips. Their faces were so close now that he could feel her heat, the gap between them as thin as a single thread. Before Leon's consciousness could fully surrender to the dragon patterns, the last thing he saw was Rosweiss' glowing, tender dragon eyes. Time blurred. When Leon finally stirred, his body ached as though every bone had been shattered and rebuilt. His joints popped as he sat up, leaning against the cold stone wall behind him. Across the room, Rosweiss was calmly dressing, the glow of her dragon pattern fading like the dying embers of a fire. Her movements were deliberate, careful, as she gathered and secured the components of the black gold war chariot. Once done, she walked a few steps forward, settling down against a display rack with a weary grace. The queen's exhaustion was evident, her face was flushed, her silver hair slightly disheveled, and her tail lay limply beside her. Despite her composed demeanor, she seemed quieter. Leon studied her for a moment, noting the lingering vulnerability in her posture. "I'll rest for a bit before we head back," Leon muttered, breaking the silence. Rosweiss nodded. "Fine," she replied, her voice hoarse, likely from the intensity of their earlier confrontation. For a few moments, neither spoke. The tension hung in the air, charged yet fragile. Leon leaned his head back, his gaze distant as he tried to make sense of his scattered thoughts. He knew that while Rosweiss' methods tormented him, they also weighed heavily on her. Revenge may have burned brightly in the moment, but its aftermath left behind a hollow chill. Rosweiss, however, didn't let the quiet linger too long. Shifting slightly, she began crawling toward Leon on her hands and knees. Her tail trailed behind her, and her movements were deliberate, cat-like, as though she were stalking prey. Leon blinked, stiffening. What are you doing?" he stammered, shrinking back. She stopped in front of him, resting one hand on his thigh as the other gently tilted his chin upward. Their noses were nearly touching, her warm breath brushing against his lips. Rosweiss' dragon eyes glimmered with a familiar playfulness. She smirked, the teasing edge of her personality reasserting itself. "Leon, your body doesn't seem as vigorous as it used to be," she purred, her tone dripping with mockery. Leon clenched his jaw, glaring at her. "I'll take that as a compliment," he muttered, though the flush creeping up his neck betrayed his discomfort. The queen chuckled softly, and she had looked at him with mild amusement and remarked, "You're not as strong as before." Leon groaned and shook his head, trying to dispel the thought. In the next morning, a knock on the door roused him. Still groggy, he opened it, expecting Myun, but it was Rosweiss and Noah. A stubborn mother. And her equally stubborn daughter. "Good morning, Leon," Rosweiss greeted him. "Morning," he replied, then looked down at Noah. "And good morning to you too." "Yeah. Morning." Leon didn't push for more. Instead, he turned to Rosweiss. "What brings you here?" "Noah wants to apply to the Dragonling department at St. Heis Academy. The entrance exams are rigorous, and I want you to tutor him this month." Leon glanced at Noah before responding, "I can do that. But in exchange, I want something equivalent, like the last time when you took a walk with me after Myun learned to write her name." Rosweiss raised an eyebrow. "Are you bargaining with me?" "I certainly can." She smirked. "Hopefully." After all, her gaze flickered downward briefly. "You can only prove your worth in other areas now." Leon sighed. "Fine. It's a deal." Satisfied, Rosweiss turned to leave but threw one last jab over her shoulder. "Oh, by the way, dear husband, don't overwork yourself." Leon slammed the door shut. From inside the house, Noah peeked out. "What happened? Did you argue with Mom again?" "No, just casual conversation." Then Leon paused, narrowing his eyes. "Wait, what did you just call her?" "Mom." Leon's eyes lit up. He crouched down, excitement evident. "Did she ask you to call her that?" "Yeah. We talked this morning, and she said I should." Leon blinked in surprise. She had wasted no time. Still, he couldn't help but ask, "Do you prefer this, or did you like calling her something else better?" Noah thought for a moment. "The new one." Leon grinned. A father knows his child best. Noah rolled his eyes with embarrassment and said while leaving the room, "When do we start studying?"